UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines transverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the UDL in Action podcast, where we explore inclusion, innovation, and the real world impact of universal design for learning in classrooms of every kind. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg, and thank you for listening in to episode 6. Each episode, we respond to real questions from real educators, teachers and leaders who are designing for learner variability and rethinking what inclusive practice can look like. And of course, I'm delighted to welcome my brilliant co-host, Rhonda Laswell from Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Indiana, someone who brings her wealth of knowledge, wisdom, and practical know-how to every episode. Rhonda, welcome back.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Rhonda, today our questions focus on how schools can create a collaborative culture embedded in universal design for learning. Our first question comes from Serene, who is a head of department at a rural high school in Queensland. Serene is wondering, where do you start when teachers know nothing about UDL, let alone implementing UDL?
Oh, that's probably one of my favorite topics. I think it's like when you're working with students for the first time on a science project, right? And the light bulb goes off. So with the beginning stages of UDL, I would really suggest that teachers spend time on just one principle. So do a basic professional development over the 3 principles, and then have each teacher or a group of teachers, either grade level or department wise, work on just one principle. And the reason I say that is I think we all lean into one of those naturally. And what I mean by that is if you are a teacher who really puts relationships at the forefront of your learning culture, then engagement for you is just going to feel natural, right? So you want to latch onto that before you dig into the other ones. If you are a hands-on person who really likes to do demonstrations and get kids up and moving, you're probably action and expression more naturally. And then if you're that kind of bookwormy, take notes, read personality who just loved school, right? And even played teacher as a child, you probably lean more into representation. So I think it's finding where your talent or your passion is, digging into that so that you have better understanding of why you're choosing that and what that means for designing the learning culture. Then once you do that, it makes it so much easier then to begin to bring in the components of the other principles and the other guidelines. So that would be my suggestion to begin with.
I think that's a brilliant suggestion. I have to confess that I am immediately drawn to the principle of action and expression. Can I ask which one you're drawn to first and foremost?
Absolutely, action and expression. When I taught science, my mantra was my kids need to see it and experience it 7 times, 7 different ways. And that was just my own philosophy before I even knew about UDL. So yes, I'm action and expression for sure.
I also loved seeing the enthusiasm that came about from the kids when they were permitted or given the opportunity to express to me what they knew via their chosen means. The difference in buy-in with the children was it was significant. So that's part of the reason why that particular principle is it just so resonates, seeing the students wanting to express to you their knowledge in their chosen means via their creative platform. And all of them were different. When I was teaching and implementing UDL, I gave them 3 different options, but then as to how they could potentially do their assessment tasks. But then if they chose or wanted to do something different, then they just needed to come and chat with me and we could go from there. But I had everything from posters to PowerPoint presentations to oral presentations. It just depended on the student and what they felt most comfortable with. What do you think in response to that?
Well, I think the one that teachers who aren't naturally drawn to action expression struggle with the most is that one, because when you think about the other two, most post-secondary spends all of their time on representation, right? Content, the what of learning. The relationship people can handle both of those, but the issue becomes when you get into action expression, you're giving up control and you have to share the power of the learning environment. And for a lot of us, that's just the hardest piece to do. It's also much more challenging sometimes to navigate the assessment piece of that because it's more diverse. And so it's just easier, right, to give everybody the exact same thing, the exact same way, and it makes it easier to grade. But again, if we go back and think about um, our students and the diversity they present and the different ways that they approach just thinking about something, we're not going to get an accurate representation of what they actually know or what they actually can do if we expect them all to do it the same way.
Excellent. Excellent, Rhonda. I found that when the students were clear about the assessment task and what it was, the criteria, what it was that I was assessing them against, that's when the momentum just built in regards to wanting to do
Yes.
that assessment task to the best of
And
their
that's
ability.
why the goal is so important, that the students understand the goal, that the goal is posted, and that the means are not embedded in the goal. That
Yes,
way, we're not naturally putting a barrier in place for them to express what they know by embedding the means. So that's the challenging part, but that's also what makes the environment much more engaging for students. You have less behavior issues and you have more growth in learning because students are able to find a point of access and then they can latch on to that and move forward, and they actually increase their growth much more quickly in those environments.
fantastic. It's developing that learner agency, isn't it?
Exactly. If we
Yeah,
don't teach them how to navigate the learning environment, then
yeah.
that's the barrier. You're not even going to get to the content or the skill you're looking to teach them.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Very good. Thank you. The next question today comes from Katrina, who leads a large and diverse team of educators across a range of settings. Katrina's question leads on from Serene's. Katrina wants to know, how can schools foster a culture of UDL where all educators collaborate and support one another in meeting diverse student needs?
Well, I think that one really starts with the structure of any kind of meetings that you have or professional developments that you have. So
Right.
when you go into a meeting with a group of teachers, there should be a goal. It should be posted, and you should be modeling universal design and how you set up your meetings and your professional development, because that really puts you in the mindset of universal design for learning. And then I think from there, I cannot iterate enough how important it is to have a shared language and vocabulary around universal design for learning, the characteristics of an expert learner. When you begin to use that language and you're using that in every environment, then it just
Yes.
becomes part of the fabric. So it doesn't matter if a student's in third grade or in seventh grade, they understand the importance of learner agency and those characteristics of being purposeful, reflective, resourceful, authentic, strategic, and action oriented. And while you may not use all those big words on the same day, there isn't any reason why you can't begin to talk about what does that word mean? when we're doing a lesson on this, how can you be purposeful? How can you be reflective? You can have those conversations with very young students all the way up to 12th grade or whatever senior level you have. And so I think it begins by starting to have conversations around the vocabulary of UDL and then embedding those things into the environment. And then I also think, too, another powerful piece to this, and I go back to this, I know a lot. I believe the platform for UDL is having a common behavior expectation system. You know, at this school, we are respectful, responsible, and safe. What does that look like? What does that look like in the library? What does that look like in the cafeteria? What does that look like on the bus, in the hallway? And as you begin to develop that language for behavior expectations, voice levels, right? What's the voice level when we're doing reading with a partner? What's the voice level when we're taking an exam, you know? So just understanding a shared way to navigate the learning space is really the doormat into making it much, much easier to move into those pieces and parts that come together that create that fabric of universal design for learning. And then once you have that shared language, it just makes it so much easier. Kids, each year as they progress, they're hearing the same vocabulary and they're developing their agency and their executive functioning skills to a higher degree and to a higher degree. And so I just always go back to that. Teaching them how to navigate those spaces is so important. It also takes a lot off their cognitive load because if they're stressed about those things, then it's much more difficult for them to learn content and skill. For example, if things are labeled in the room and they're easily accessible, and I know I can go get this if I need it or that, or I've been taught how to appropriately use the resources, right? Then that cognitive load comes off and I can get into the business of learning.
Yes, yeah, great. So would you, if you're a school leader and you're wanting to shift language or embed language rather within the school culture, would you start by, talking about certain terminology in staff meetings and then having conversation around how has that particular terminology been working within the classroom or the school context? What would you suggest, or what have you seen has been particularly beneficial?
So I think starting with the behavior expectations, if you don't already have that, is a good place to start. And then having teachers begin to have students come up with what does that look like in the classroom? Just right there, right? That just starts it out. It makes it really easy then to transfer that into the hallway and the bathroom and the cafeteria and those other spaces. And then from there, introducing the learner agency pieces. And you can do those one at a time by principle. So for example, if you wanted to start with engagement, you could look at purposeful and reflective, right? And you could have them begin to have those conversations within the context of learning experience, right? The other piece of that, though, that you have to back out of a little bit and always remember is if the students don't know what the goal is, they're going to have their own goal. They're always going to have a goal. The brain is goal directed. So you want to start with a goal, right? And that is typically your learning standard, whether that's a content standard or a skill standard. So, the goal is that standard. You can turn these pieces of UDL into a goal too. Our goal today is to learn what it means to be purposeful when reading nonfiction text or a nonfiction paragraph, right? And so you're just adding that layer to the learning piece. And what you're actually beginning to do is you're teaching them how to learn as much as you are teaching them what you want them to know. And so that shared language is so important because then when, as an administrator, you're walking through the building, you can go into classrooms and ask questions around the goal because you can see it posted, but then you can also ask questions around those learner agency pieces and you can begin to bring some cohesion, right, within the learning culture.
Yeah. Excellent. I love that. The power of language can never be underestimated. And use of certain language and understanding of terminology is just so important, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's an academic language, but it's made very it's almost utilitarian in a way because, it can be used whether I'm in first grade or I'm in 12th grade, right? But then it can also be used as I go out into the workplace or I go into post-secondary. Those are life skills. Those aren't just skills for, academia. Those are skills to be successful in life.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Couldn't agree more. So leading on from that starting point, our beginning teachers have so much to grasp. And my friend and colleague Belinda, working in a special school in Queensland, is wanting to know, how can we effectively support the development of beginning teachers through a universal design for learning UDL lens, while also managing the daily challenges of student behaviour and well-being?
Yeah, our new teachers, I have so much compassion for them because they too have a huge cognitive load because they're managing other people for the first time. They're managing behavior, they're managing emotion. There's just so much going on there. So I think with our new teachers, it's really, really important to come alongside them with small pieces and parts. And I think it's also really important to be in their learning environments regularly, and then having just a very short debrief with them about what you're seeing and things that they think they are doing well or that they think they need to be working on, I think is really important. And for them, I would break it down even further. So instead of just focusing on a principle, I would just focus on one guideline within a principle, right? And just slowly begin to have them embed that throughout the course of the school year. And what's beautiful about that is there are 9, and there are typically 9 months of school. And I always suggest that we just take one a month, right? What would we do with a student who is learning so much at one time? We would chunk it, we would break it down, we would make it easy to access. And so we have to model UDL with our teachers the same way we want our teachers to model it and do it with our students. And that's what makes it real. That's what makes it authentic. That's what makes it really accessible in a way that allows the teacher to be both a teacher and a student at the same time. And those conversations are important. We had building level embedded teacher support at the school district that I worked for. And what was beautiful about that was we would go in and do an observation and we would jot down what we were seeing, and then we'd have a conversation with the teacher. We'd cut them out and have them put them on the guidelines like a placemat, right? But when you're working with a brand new teacher, what I would suggest is you just have a little something like a note card and you just jot down what you saw, give them a word of encouragement, and then debrief later about the actual guideline. I think those small pieces of encouragement are no different than what we would want to give a student. So, for example, if we have a student who is maybe struggling to stay on task, we would be wanting to do a lot of positive reinforcement and make sure what we were doing was really engaging. So if we have a teacher who's brand new, we want to do that same thing. We want to be in there. We want to be encouraging, even if it's just a walk through for a minute here and there and just leaving a small sticky note of encouragement. That is huge. And then the other piece to that is letting them cover their class for them and let them go somewhere for 15 or 20 minutes to see a teacher that's doing something really amazing that you think they would benefit from. Because it's the collective power of the entire building that really you've got a wealth of expertise going on a lot of times, and you just need to carve out some small pieces of time here and there to allow that big brain, right, to be accessible to those individuals as well.
I love that. I love the sticky note of encouragement. That's just perfect. And also just allowing the beginning teacher, just that little bit of time to go and observe another teacher. There
Yes.
is nothing like you do, we do, and then I do.
Yep.
And that you've just explained that so well. That's wonderful. Can I ask, have you, when working with beginning teachers, have you had any kind of resistance with them wanting to implement UDL in their classroom context, simply because it's just another thing I need to get my head around, that kind of understanding?
Well, I don't think that was a huge barrier for the district I worked at, but that might have been because our um, teacher evaluation system is 50% the implementation of
Oh.
UDL. And so that right there puts it on your frontal lobe. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I will say this, I often found that it was teachers who had been teaching for a long time that were a little more resistant because they felt like they really had a handle, and they did. Don't get me wrong. I mean, a lot of them doing very successful things. But at the same time, if I look at behavior data, like if I go in and look at incidences and referrals to the office, hands down, teachers who are really implementing and utilizing the behavior system and UDL had nearly no behavior issues. And that's just because engagement goes up. But then also too, if you're teaching them how to navigate the learning environment and they're not having to spend all that cognitive load just trying to make sense of where they're supposed to be, what they're doing, that, because teachers naturally loved school most likely, right? And so they were just like, they walk in the door ready to learn. Not every kid walks in the door ready to learn. Not every kid walks in the door capable of that
Mm,
initially. If they've experienced any kind of trauma, if they have food insecurity, if they're neurodiverse, there are things going on, and their mind is focused on things other than what we would want them to be focused on academically. And we have to answer to that, right? So that can be a really big barrier. And that's why it's so important that we tune into that first. That
mm.
really, that's the placemat, I say, or the doormat, or the welcoming mat to being able to feel like they belong in the learning environment.
Fantastic. And if that's not a draw card for a beginning teacher or any teacher actually in regards to the benefits of understanding and learning about understanding and developing skills in universal design for learning, I don't know what is, because
Right,
at the end
because
of the day,
you want to teach content and skill, right? You don't want to manage behavior.
oh, it's
It's
exhausting.
exhausting. It is.
Mm, mm. And that's not why we did teaching. That's not
No.
what we're not here for behavior management. We're wanting to uh, make a change, make learning something that students want to strive for and continue to strive for indefinitely. That's
Absolutely.
excellent. Thank you, Rhonda. So, once again, so many great examples today. Before we wrap up, though, what's our one takeaway you'd love our listeners to walk away with from episode 6?
Oh, I would say that if you design it, they will learn. And what I mean by that is we do lesson plans, and we set up all these amazing things to do. But if we truly design it based on learner variability, you will have success and students will learn.
That's excellent. That's excellent. That's insightful. It's clear. It's excellent. So thank you, Rhonda, and a big thank you to our listeners for your insightful questions. And thank you to all of you leading this important work. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, just get in touch. It's no problem. Until next time, keep designing for possibility, not predictability. This has been the UDL in Action podcast. Subscribe, share, and keep the conversation going. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Toodaloo.